It's been a long time coming, but I want to do another army video. Based off that recent poll that I posted about a month or so back, you guys were saying that you want to see more hour-plus videos, more army videos. So I figure what's a better one to start in on than the Karaz Angkor, the Dawi, the dreaded 8th edition Dwarf army list. I do have some other army lists we're going to go through as well, but I think this is a good one because we haven't done a list for an army that's out yet. We've done ones that are heavily speculative. We've done ones about things that, okay, this is what we think might come to Total War Warhammer 2, 3, 4, whatever the hell. But I think today it'd be fun to do just a very nice, very standard, very good, solid, even great starter army, the Dwarfs. Now, the Dwarfs of the 8th edition were very strong. They were very competitive. I mean, nothing really beats the Chaos Demons in the Warhammer Fantasy 8th edition, but I don't want to go there. But the Dwarves had a lot of really awesome answers for things, and they were a really great intro army to think for a lot of people because even though they had to field a lot of models, their models were small. Their models were easy, relatively easy to paint because they didn't have a whole ton of skin on them, only arms, which are pretty easy to paint. And on top of that, they're almost all covered in armor. So it's a very base, easy color scheme, very easy to get into. They're very strong, stalwart people. So you know this to be a very great army for starters because it allows for a lot of margins for error. You know, you can make mistakes and still be covered by the armor saves of the models and stuff like that. So we are going to go through each and every portion of the army list here today. I'm going to start off with the lords / heroes, with the runesmiths, the rune lords, the thanes, dwarf lords, and we're going to kind of work our way down the rest of the list. But our very first stop is going to be with the army special rules. Now this, of course, we know to be existent in every single 8th edition, well, in previous edition, army book, in which case it talks about some special rules that are very specific to that race as a whole. We see martial prowess, or we see murderous prowess when it comes to the high elves or the dark elves, or we see the high elves' ability to always strike first, those kind of characteristics that are specific to that army. Well, we have those here for the dwarfs. So their very first one is called Ancestral Grudge. Now we know this because the dwarfs have a long-lasting hate for orcs, goblins, and skaven, and this hatred for them spawns a special rule in tabletop. And hatred meant that you could actually, I believe it's re-roll your to hit rolls, if I can remember properly. But basically, it just meant that if you were fighting against orcs and goblins or skaven, any units from those books, then you had the hatred rule against them, and you could roll specific bonuses against them. Now, we see this represented in Total War Warhammer 2 by Thorgrim Grudgebearer or any Dwarf Lords and Ancestral Grudge ability on campaign. This gives them a percentage weapon strength increase against orcs and goblins. Clearly, this hasn't been upgraded or updated to take into consideration that Skaven are now in the game, so hopefully with a further or a down the line patch to dwarfs, or kind of the dwarf revamp that every first game race is getting, we'll get that added into the Ancestral Grudge. Now the Ancestral Grudge though is way different in tabletop than it is in Total War Warhammer. It's not just simply a bonus to weapon strength. In tabletop, you rolled at the very beginning of basically the game, when right after you deployed but before the vanguard would move, you basically determine how deep this ancestral grudge went. You roll a die, and a 1 or 2 is a personal vendetta, meaning the dwarf general has hatred against the opposing army's general. Really cool ability, especially if you want to get them into any kind of close combat and utilize the challenge mechanic from tabletop. Really great. Now, 3 to 4 gets you rancorous resolve, meaning all friendly character models have hatred against all opposing character models. So a really cool way to do a lot of cool challenges, get your thanes up close and personal, lop off a head or 2, who knows. Now lastly, 5 to 6, seething score to settle. All your models have hatred against all the enemy's models. So, I mean, obviously when you rolled, you wanted that because then you were rolling to hit on everything you're up against, even if it wasn't an orc, a goblin, or a skaven, so that's pretty cool. Now, some other little mechanics here. We have dwarf crafted, which basically meant that it typically applied to siege engines, that they were dwarf crafted, so you could or weaponry, so like thunderers, guns, and quarrelers and whatnot. So it basically just meant that your normal -1 to hit penalty when performing a stand and shoot charge reaction, because in tabletop you could react to a charge, stand and shoot, brace yourself, depending on which kind of unit you were. And if you stand and shoot, you suffered a -1 to hit penalty. With Dwarf Crafted, you did not suffer such a thing. So very easy. That didn't even make it into Total War Warhammer 2 that I can see. It might be a special little ability in the red line of abilities that I didn't see. So if you guys see that, holla at me. Now, these next three are going to be pretty Ancestral Grudge, Resolute, Relentless, and Shield Wall. We're going to see throughout the majority of this armory book. You're going to be sick of hearing me talk about it. Resolute just means that as a charge, not as a charge reaction, but when a unit is charged, when dwarves are charged, they get a +1 to their strength. You can look at that as an equivocal match to melee attack. Relentless just means that anytime that you've got this on a model, they don't need to pass a leadership test to march. Now, we don't see that represented in Total War Warhammer because we don't have marching mechanics. We just see that marching drains vigor more. I'd love to see Relentless added into the game as a way to reduce that vigor drain. And that might be a blue line ability in the campaign that I again, haven't seen. And if you have, please let me know in the comment section below. But I'd love to see that represented on the dwarfs as a whole, rather than being an activatable ability, because that's the key of the dwarfs, right? These guys can't move fast. They have a movement of 3 in tabletop, so you have to have this army that is it has to get charged as a result of its slow movement. So you've got Resolute to kind of counter that, Shield Wall to kind of counter that. And we'll talk about that in a second. Relentless is it forces you to. Well, the dwarves as a whole force you to kind of march every so often, and Relentless kind of makes it so that you don't have to suffer such a penalty from marching because you have such a terrible movability. So Games Workshop knew the kind of pitfalls of having a dwarf army, and the special rules they created for them tried to kind of shore up those pitfalls by making them a little bit more accessible, but also at the same time made their weaknesses palpable. You know, like Resolute does make it the fact that you have to get charged a bunch, like a palpable portion of the army. Now, lastly is Shield Wall, and we see Shield Wall represented in Total War Warhammer in specific ways, but let's talk about this. So in a turn in which their unit is charged, all models with this special rule receive a +1 bonus to any parry save that they are eligible to take. Parry save is basically, it was almost like an aside to a vulnerable save. It's kind of weird. But the way that they've actually represented this in Total War Warhammer is charge defense. We see that on our Dwarf Warriors. We see that on our Dwarf Lords. Ironically enough, we don't see it on all the units that should have it. The Quarrelers should have it. The Thunderers should have it. They, of course, do not. And I could understand why they would do that. It doesn't make a lot of sense in a game like this to have charge defense for a unit that is using ranged weapons. So I get that they're trying to balance it out, because they don't want these ranged units to just be complete hardasses, like impossible to supplant. I mean, they already are decent combatants, so now we're going to give them charge defense. That's going to be a little much. So I understand that. But the Hammerers, they don't have charge defense, which they do in the tabletop. And the Ironbreakers have charge defense against all to kind of compensate for their shield wall of Gromrel, which we'll talk about when we talk about them. So it's interesting to see how they took the shield wall mechanic and gave it to certain units and didn't to others. Like, I think that giving it to the Hammerers, that would have been fine. The Hammerers don't have their stubborn ability, so why not give them that? They don't have their Kingsguard ability, so why not give them that? Again, these are abilities we will talk about more, so we'll go into those, of course. One interesting thing is the Dwarf Lord has charge defense against all, yet the Thane doesn't, and the Thane has shield wall as well in his special rules. So we'll go into each one of these character profiles or unit profiles and talk about those discrepancies and how they should be possibly shored up in the hopeful revamp of the dwarfs. But now that we've gone into the special rules, guys, let's jump deep into this dwarf army. If this is your first time watching an army video with me, the way I do this is that I'll read the large lore blurb from the actual book of the 8th edition. It's usually anywhere from a 4 to 6 paragraph chunk of lore. Then we'll go into kind of what the special rules are like and how they've translated into Total War Warhammer 2. I will show the the picture from the book, the 8th edition book, during the lore blurb, and then I will show you the actual model from the game. I'm not going to show you Total War Warhammer 2 models because you boot the game up if you want to see them. We all have seen them, but not a lot of people have actually seen the tabletop models. They're a little harder to come by, so I want to be able to focus on those. The last thing I'm going to talk about the army special rules before we jump into the Thane and Lord is natural resistance. Again, we already see this applied to the entire dwarf army as a 25% magic resistance, but basically the way this was in tabletop was when a dwarf army attempts to dispel, they have a +2 bonus to all dispel attempts. This kind of stems from the deep lore root of them, where the old ones made, of course, the lizardmen, right? And the lizardmen were very subservient and they were very magically prone. Then they made the high elves, and the high elves were too magically prone, too open to the corruption of chaos, basically. And then they made dwarfs, and the dwarfs were too magically immune. They said, okay, well, maybe the winds of magic is what's fucking up our races here. Let's not touch on that. We'll just make these little tiny stunties that they don't harness the winds of magic, but they're well, somewhat immune to it. So that's why you get that natural resistance. And then I guess the porridge that was just right was humans, where they can resist the winds of magic, but they also can be corrupted by it at the same time. So that's kind of a little lore aside. But guys, again, let's dive on in to the dwarf lords and thanes. Starting with the lore blurb, of course. The leaders of a dwarf throng are its lords and thanes. These are the most powerful fighters in the army, fell-handed warriors equipped with the finest arms and armor of the clan's weapon horde. As a rule, dwarf lords and thanes are a grim sort, for they are the leaders of a dour people. Upon their broad shoulders is carried the weight of untold debt, the inherited grudges of a long-suffering and unforgiving race. It is their lot to avenge all wrongdoing to their clan, hold, or race, not just in the present, but also for all time. Failure to redress an injury from antiquity is particularly galling, an act of disrespect to the much-revered ancestors. Lords and thanes are well tutored in the ways of their ancient foes, and must absorb a wealth of wisdom. Luckily, they are privy to the councils of clan elders, as well as venerable runesmiths and engineers. This sagacity is vital, for by the time their beards have grown long enough to lead, dwarf lords and thanes must master tactics and maneuver, learning to wield the armored might of their throng, as well as they wield an axe and shield. For a thane to progress to become a lord, he must bear royal blood. If a king dies, a lord may rise in succession, or a new kingship may be claimed if the clan retakes an old hold or establishes a new one. All leaders swear oaths of loyalty to a major dwarf stronghold, which, in turn, is sworn to the High King of Karak. The High King nominally commands all kings, but in practice, this is more of a matter of cooperation than of strict obedience, as dwarfs are proud individuals who rile at the idea of blind obedience. All dwarfs take great pride in their possessions, but none more so than the ruling class. Depending upon wealth or clan, a dwarf lord or thane might be equipped with runic weapons and armor. It is an honor for a dwarf to bear such relics of war, for each item is passed down from their forefathers, an ancient legacy in its own right. Covered in runes and bristling with arcane might, each of the hold's relics has a long history of great deeds and feats of battle. While dwarfs are notably an infantry force, there are a few exceptions among their leaders. Some lords are carried into battle by shield bearers, stout warriors who heft a shield to serve their liege as a fighting platform. This was common amongst dwarves of the southern holds and has been continued elsewhere, notably by King Alaric Ranulfson of Carrick-Herne. In other clans, especially northern ones, lords and thanes prefer to fight atop oath stones, rocks upon which runes are struck, listing out the clan's honor or perhaps the lord's lineage or deeds. The stone is a symbol of their homeland, a piece of their stronghold made manifest. Pretty badass, right? I mean, you got these pretty awesome characters, and every time you see a dwarf, they're relatively dour. They're always kind of grumpy about something, very disgruntled folk. And the special rule for dwarfs, or the dwarf lords and thanes, there aren't a lot. Ancestral Grudge, Relentless, Resolute, and Shield Wall. That's really it. After that, it just kind of comes down to how you're going to equip them, what kind of runes you're going to give them, and how they're going to apply. And we see this kind of translated into Total War Warhammer pretty well. I mean, we see that the Dwarf Lord itself has charge defense against all. I'll say that that's their shield wall capability. And I guess at the same time, resolute. And we see that he also gets expert charge defense. So, you know, I guess I'll just kind of stack those things together. Now, Foe Seeker and Charger and Stand Your Ground are not really consequential to tabletop, but, you know, you get Star Metal Plate, which is actually an item from the Dwarf Codex or army list that you can choose. You have Iron Warden's Hammer, which is, again, another item directly from the book. So you've got these things that kind of nod to it. What I would like to see, though, are master runes or not even master runes added into the items list as a way to buff your lord. The lord, for the most part, is very tanky, almost in the same way that we see Empire lords are very tanky. Like, generic lords are not to be looked down the nose upon. Although we all typically go for special characters, the generic lords, especially of the dwarfs, are very stalwart, very strong. I mean, a base dwarf lord has got 420 weapon strength. That's very substantial. And 120 armor as well. I mean, that's awesome for just being a 1,000 point dwarf lord. I mean, 1,000 point if you strip him down, by the way. I mean, it's 1,200 if he's got all of his abilities, well, and all of his items at 1611. But still, my point remains is that they are still a very capable, very strong little fighting force, and we see that in actual tabletop. In tabletop, they were extremely strong. Weapon skill of 7, a toughness of 5, which is above most things of that. All elves have a toughness of 3. So 5, you can kind of have that huge disparity there, right? Where humans typically have a toughness of 3 or 4, depending on what their rank in human society is. So a toughness of 5, a nice whopping 3 wounds and 4 attacks. They're pretty cheap units in of themselves, and they have great leadership. So the dwarfs, especially how you can outfit these guys in tabletop, I'd love to see that represented a little bit better in Total War Warhammer. You do kind of see it through the RPGS system of the campaign development, but I'd love to see it more on the actual custom battle portion of it, being able to really outfit these lords and thanes to fit a little bit more, and especially kind of give the thane a little bit more oomph. After he lost the Tormentor Sword, he kind of became a lot less scary. But that sums up our lords and thanes. Let's jump on over to another lord class, or another hero here, the Engineer. Now in tabletop, the Engineer could not be a lord, it could strictly be a hero, but this is just done in the order of the book. I'm going to go Lord, Dwarf Lord Thane, Engineers, then Runesmiths and Rune Lords. Even though you can't have these guys as lords in Total War Warhammer. But let's read their little blurb here. Given the number of war machines with which the dwarfs can equip themselves, it is not surprising to find members of the Engineers Guild accompanying a throng to battle. To most master engineers, this field work is tiresome, as it takes them away from their forges and workshops and shows them firsthand how their beloved engines of destruction are dragged into position, dented by enemy shot, and invariably aimed in a manner of not as fully optimized as would be ideal. As all dwarfs revere fine craftsmanship, their war machines are the most polished and best cared for in the world, treated by their crew with all the respect due a venerable clan member. Nonetheless, even this level of care falls well short of the wishes of the notoriously cantankerous engineers. After a battle, master engineers oversee repairs, but during the fight, they're exceptional, if gruff, at directing crews on how to best aim and fire a war machine. Theirs is a skill born of intimate familiarity with the workings of each device. With a glance, a master engineer can tell when a bolt thrower is set with too much torsion, or when conditions warrant extra black powder for an organ gun. They are consummate craftsmen, being able to gauge the intricacies of laying the deadliest of cannon shots, or giving advice on how to best carve boulders into the most accurate ammunition for a grudge thrower. The master engineer can also direct the rapid construction of effective entrenchments, such as the stacked stone walls or dugout gun pits that offer protection from enemy missile fire to both war machine and crew. Master engineers are doughty warriors, and while they might be more interested in drafting plans for fortifications or designing new mines, they are more than capable of fighting in the front lines. To protect their precious war machines, they fight with all determination and grit. So, pretty cool, right? We see these guys as exactly how we kind of see them in Total War Warhammer, right? We see them as these artillery masters that kind of help out with all artillery pieces, giving out entrenchment abilities and giving out ballistics calibration and extra powder, so on and so forth. Now, what is that like in tabletop, though? Their special rules are Ancestral Grudge, Relentless, and Resolute. That's the same for every single dwarf, pretty much. There's a few exceptions here and there. But Artillery Master is a bit bit different here. So Artillery Master, we don't actually see in Total War Warhammer. We see things that are like their other abilities, but we'll talk about this in a second here. So if a Master Engineer is not fleeing, a single war machine that is within 3 inches of him can use his ballistic skill, which is 4, and reroll 1 artillery dice during the shooting phase. So basically, he's using his ability, his keen eye, to allow the artillery piece to shoot more accurately. Is probably the best way to put it. The artillery dice, when you roll them in tabletop, you roll to see if you hit. Once you hit, you'd roll a scatter die to see if it wasn't a flame weapon, to see where the actual template would land. It would point it'll had an arrow, and it would point a specific direction. You would nominate, say, I'm gonna shoot here, point to a random spot. The arrow would then tell you to move it this direction. You'd roll another die that would then tell you to scatter it that many inches. So it would allow you to really kind of pinpoint and fire a little bit better. So it was a great way of actually getting accuracy from the Dwarf's artillery, because the Dwarf artillery was the bane of dragons. I mean, if you had a dragon in your army or against dwarfs, say goodbye to that dragon. That thing could get gibbed outright. Because I believe and I can't remember off the top of my head, but I believe the rule is if the strength doubles the toughness of something, it can die in 1 shot. So, so what we see in Total War Warhammer is ballistics calibration, which adds accuracy and reload skill. This is basically the same thing as Artillery Master. They just kind of tweaked it a little bit here, right? They also get entrenchment in tabletop. Up to 1 unit with the troop type war machine can be entrenched for each Master Engineer in the army. An entrenched war machine is treated as being in hard cover and basically just gives it more defensive capabilities. But how we see that in Total War Warhammer is it grants it physical resistance, it can't move, and it gives it a plus 40% AP missile damage. So it really confers a lot more than just bonuses to defensive bonuses to the target artillery piece, and makes it a lot more terrifying on the battlefield at the same time, because you can actually get attacked and have your artillery piece still shoot depending on how much of the crew is dedicated to the combat at hand. So at the same time, if you don't have anyone attacking, this ability can be perceived as useless, and the ability in and of itself costs, I believe, 150 coins, multiplayer points, if you want to think of it that way. It's not have any consequence in campaign, but this allows you to get benefits out of this ability even if they're not being attacked. So it's a pretty cool, awesome ability here. Now, there is another ability called Stand Back, Sir, and this kind of plays off of the ability called Look Out, Sir. In tabletop, you could use Look Out, Sir if your special character was in a unit, and you'd use Look Out, Sir, and a non-special character unit would take the hit that your special character was supposed to take. Now for Stand Back, Sir, a model with this special rule that is within 3 inches of a war machine is allowed to take a Look Out, Sir roll, just as if he was in 3 inches of a unit of 5 or more models of the same troop type as himself. If the roll is successful, the hit is resolved instead against the nearest friendly war machine. Because typically you're not going to have a Master Engineer locked into a unit. You'd want them with your siege engines. So this is a way to get the Look Out, Sir ability with the Master Engineer who is not a part of the unit. That's definitely a very tabletop heavy rule and doesn't have much of a place in Total War Warhammer 2, so I'm glad that they just kind of skipped over that one. But that kind of shores up our engineer here. Let's jump on over to probably the most prolific lord and hero choice in the Dwarf army, the Rune Smith / Rune Lord. And I think that they did a really good job of doing a really good representation of the Rune Smiths in Total War Warhammer. So let's read their lore blurb and jump into their rules. Runesmiths work spells with their hammercraft, binding the winds of magic into mighty runes of power. They are a suspicious lot and jealously protect the secrets kept in their anvils and hammers, guarding the knowledge that allows them to make magic items, weapons, armor, rings, and talismans of greater potency than items wrought by any other mortal race upon the world. The ancient Guild of Runesmiths is one of the oldest and most respected institutions in all of the Karazhan Corps. According to legend, its origins stretch back to the days of Grungi, the great ancestor god of mining, master of the forge, and the lord of the runes. The Runesmiths Guild claims descent from Grungi's son. For this reason, the Runesmiths sometimes refer to themselves as the clan of Morgrim, although they are not the only clan to claim descent from Grungi or his many sons. The number of runesmiths is not very great, and those remaining are related to each other, often in some very remote fashion. Each carries on his direct family's traditions, learning the craftsmanship of blending magic and metal together by use of mighty runes of power. The greatest of their kind are known as rune lords. These elder masters do superlative work and are accorded the sort of reverence normally reserved for the ancestor gods. When a runesmith judges the time is right, he chooses a young relative to be his apprentice, and reticently teaches him, for an apprentice has to prove his worthiness to wring out even the most basic steps of the craft from his master. Many powerful runes have been lost over time, simply because a runesmith could find no one he considered worthy enough to gain his innermost knowledge. Luckily, unless slain in battle, runesmiths tend to live for a very long time, although they grow progressively more obstinate as they age. Currently, the most prolific of still working rune lords is Thoric Ironbrow of Karak Azul, but the oldest living runesmith is Crag the Grim, master rune lord of Karaz Karak. Despite being a living link to a bygone era, Crag has grown to so stubborn as to be unbearable. In battle, runesmiths aid their side by dampening enemies' magic, earthing spells harmlessly before they can wreak havoc amongst the dwarfs. They do this in the same manner as they capture the winds of magic to forge items, and they often bring along rune-covered talismans to aid in this endeavor. Many runesmiths bear weapons and armor of their own crafting, and they are eager to show their comrades exactly how effective they can be, whether by some gift of grungy, or perhaps as a side effect of centuries of beating magical runes into white, hot metal. When a runesmith feels the rage of battle, his weapons and those of the friendly forces around him begin to glow and radiate heat, as if remembering the forge fires from which they were created. This aura of power has proven effective in helping blades penetrate the armor of toughened hides of any foe. In times of great need, the most powerful rune lords will bring an anvil of doom to battle. The anvils of doom are the most ancient heirlooms of the entire dwarf race. They are the very anvils upon which the rune weapons of legend were forged, and were perhaps the very creations of the great forefather Grungi. The anvils are especially made to attract and hold the winds of magic, arcane powers which can be captured and subsequently unleashed by a rune lord. Separate runes struck in the right order can call upon the different ancestor gods: Valaya for loyalty, Grungi to boost the power of arms and armor, and Grimnir to unlock the energies of fury. You see these spellcasters of the dwarf race and how they're not necessarily spellcasters in the conventional sense, right? There's these kind of rune speakers, casters, throwers, crafters, and it's a very kind of awesome lore that these guys have. You know, they're these kind of they're the dwindling sect of a dwindling race. And it's very kind of romantic and sweeping in the way in which they portray these guys. That's what I like about the runes in general. Have always been some of my favorite things of the dwarf race. I've always loved like the beautiful stylization of runes in all of these books. If you look through the 8th edition book, it's just covered in runes and Celtic knots and all this kind of really awesome Celtic imagery and portrayal, and it's really sick. I mean, if you ever played Dark Ages of Camelot, I was up the ass of Midgard. I was a Thane, I was the rune master. Like, all that stuff was so cool to me, and it plays so heavily into the way that these characters are made. You know, they've got ancestral grudge, they've got armor piercing, they have the native magic resistance of 1 or 2 if it's a runesmith or a rune lord, relentless, resolute, shield wall, the things that we've now come to expect. But how do they deal with some of their other abilities? They have Forge Fire, and we see that portrayed in Total War Warhammer. And I have to say, I'll be totally honest with you, the Rune Lord is probably one of the best representations of a unit into the game. I love it. There are certain things that are missing, and I'll let them slide because they include so many other things. Now, Forge Fire grants an increase to AP damage in an area around you in Total War Warhammer. In the tabletop, it simply grants you the armor-piercing ability, which was awesome. You didn't have to roll to wound. You just rolled... You'd roll to hit. Or, no, I'm sorry. If you rolled to wound, they didn't get an armor save unless they had an invulnerable save. That's AP. Sorry. Out of my damn mind. But it's cool to see how they did that little nod. I mean, obviously, you can't make it so it's just going to bypass their armor, but they give them a boost to their AP damage. That's an innate special rule that we see on anyone on or off an Anvil of Doom, if they're a Rune Lord, or just a Runesmith in general. So I do really like that ability. Now, as far as the runes of Oath and Steel, the Wrath and Ruin, and Negation, and Hearth and Home, we see these represented again in tabletop. And the way they do it in tabletop is different here, right? So let's look at the rune of Wrath and Ruin for first. That's probably one of the runes everyone takes when you take a runesmith and or lord. It doesn't slow the enemy in tabletop. It just does a shit ton of damage. It does 2d6 strength 4 hits, which is very, very strong. Oath and Steel increases the armor save by 1. So we see this translated almost 1 for 1 here, right? We look at Oath and Steel in Total War Warhammer, it gives a whopping 30 plus armor. So again, that really cool translation into the game. Now we get Rune of Hearth and Home here, which gets you immune to psychology, which is again the exact same thing for the rune in Total War Warhammer. So I'm like staring at it going, what is this? It gives you immune to psychology, but it's only available on the Rune Lord. Now, there is another thing here, of course, the Anvil of Doom, which we briefly talked about. And the way they represent it in Total War Warhammer is pretty interesting. But first, let's talk about its incarnation in tabletop. So in tabletop, you get Ancestral Shield, which gives you a 5-up ward save. We'll talk about how that translates in a second, which is a very strong. The way the ward saves work, and I know I've gone over this before, but let me go through it again. So in tabletop, after you would roll to hit, you then had to see if you'd roll to wound. If you rolled to wound, the opposing force would then roll an armor save. That armor save would be whatever the value was, like heavy armor or a shield and barding, whatever. Let's just say the guy had a 2-up armor save, 2+. Rolled a die, and it was a 1. Well, he failed his armor save. He could then fall back on a parry or an invulnerable save if he had that as well. Or, I'm sorry, a ward save. Invulnerables in Warhammer 40,000. A ward save you can take if you failed an armor save. So, let's say I'm on my Anvil of Doom, which gives me an Ancestral Shield with a 5-up ward save. I fail my armor save of 3-up, let's just say. Well, I can now roll a dice again and see if I make it on my ward save. And that is what a ward save is. And we see it represented as total, like, as total negation of both physical and magic damage in Total War Warhammer. So that does make a translation. So Ancestral Shield for the Anvil of Doom. Also, Locus of Power. The way this works, of course, is it gives you additional power for your power and dispel pools in the magic phases for tabletop. And we see this represented as well in Total War Warhammer. Now, there's also Strike the Runes. A model mounted on an Anvil of Doom can use each of the following bound spells once per friendly magic phase, as long as he has not moved this turn. The Anvil can pivot on the spot before casting, and the range of the bound spells is measured from the Anvil itself. So, the reason this isn't in the game is because then you'd just be able to use these abilities like pretty much not non-stop, but within reason. If you're on an Anvil of Doom, you can just use Rune of Hearth and Home, Rune of Oath and Steel, Rune of Wrath and Ruin, just non-stop, just going hog wild across the land. So it is kind of an interesting, I guess you could say, curb of the abilities of a Rune Lord, but probably a necessary one. So Locus of Power and how that translates to Total War Warhammer is simply just a flat bonus map-wide to magic resistance. I'm quite okay with that because the dwarfs don't access runes of power or winds of magic. Totally fine with that. Then we talked about Ancestral Shield. Rather than giving them a ward save, the Rune Lord, if he's mounted on an Anvil of Doom, has a 25% physical resistance. That's their answer to Ancestral Shield. So, again, I'll take it. I wish it was a flat rune save instead, like a 10% ward save. I like rune save. That sounds cooler. Dwarves should have rune saves, which is an additional save outside of a ward save. I'm making that up. That'd be sick. But I would like to have seen that 25% physical resistance represented as a 10% ward save. And again, this might all change when we get our quote-unquote revamp to dwarfs, which I think we really already got. So this is kind of like a pipe dream at this point. But I'd love to see Ancestral Shield have that little bit of a tweak, because the Anvil of Doom is pretty cumbersome in tabletop, or I'm sorry, in Total War Warhammer. It was very strong in tabletop. You could just pop that bad boy down, and it would just be a battery of destruction. If you got to it, you had a pretty pitched fight on your hands because it had a pretty strong characteristic. Because it had some anvil guards around it and stuff like that. But I really like the way that the Anvil of Doom has transited into Total War Warhammer, and I like the way the Runesmith has transited into Total War Warhammer. I think it's a very fun, very honoring sideways move into the game. So I'm all about it. But now that kind of sums up our Lord and hero characters of the Dwarf roster, let's go into some of the other units of the Dwarf roster. Starting, of course, with the Dwarf Warriors. Now, this is part of the core unit selection. The 8th edition Warhammer Army books, or for the majority of the Warhammer Army books for that matter, were split up into several sections. You had your lords at the top, then your heroes, followed by your troop choices. Your troop choices were core, special, and rare, and you were limited by the amount of special and rare things, or unit choices you could choose based off the total points of your army, the total allocation of your core units, stuff like that. So you couldn't just take things willy-nilly across the whole way. Your rare units were typically limited either to 0 or 1, so you could only have a max of 1 unit of that rare unit in the game. So that exposition aside, let's go into the Dwarf Warriors, and we're going to speed this up a lot now here. The units themselves don't require a whole ton of extra explanation, especially since they're dwarfs, because dwarfs don't have a ton of crazy special rules that for each and every one of these units. So let's jump on in. In times of war, the leaders of the clan call the muster, and any dwarfs old enough to fight form together into regiments. Most of the individuals that will answer the call of battle are craftsmen of some sort, stone carvers, brewers, miners, and the like. But once they don their well-forged mail, put on their steel helm, and heft an axe in hand, they leave behind the artisan, turning the same industrious nature to their other calling, warfare. Dwarfs make formidable fighters. They are strong and extremely resilient, broad of shoulder and wide of girth. Although by no means quick, they are physically robust and can maintain a steady plodding pace, marching for days on end despite being loaded down by burdens and heavy mail. When they charge into battle, the momentum generated by their wide, armor-clad bodies is remarkable. Hitting the foe with a resounding impact, they have broken many enemy battle lines this way, splintering elven phalanxes, carving through orc formations, and hacking apart the great masses of Skaven that make up their verminous armies. Any foe that has fought dwarves has quickly learned to respect them. Even the elite troops of other armies have met their match against these warriors. They are grim and determined fighters, unwilling to retreat and able to advance and battle on even in face of great adversity. Tales abound of dwarfs hopelessly outnumbered, backed into unfavorable ground and pressed on all sides, somehow emerging triumphant. Protected by their heavy mail, their skillful use of overlapping shield walls, and finally, by their own tough and obstinate nature. Dwarf individuals, units, and armies as a whole seem able to absorb punishing blows that would cause other races to break and flee. With dwarfs, such suffering only serves to make them angrier, and with beards bristling and hands clenched around axe hafts and mighty warhammers, the dwarfs regroup to charge anew. Their feeble-limbed foes, too worn out and tired at the end of to even lift their weapons, are slaughtered, save for those fast enough to flee the iron-shod and implacable advance of the dwarfs. And dwarfs are vengeful. Hands that once crafted the most intricate of jewels, minds that once delighted in the simplicity of timeless wonder of an exactly constructed stone pillar, now see only red ruin. Although matter of fact in their peaceful pursuits, once a dwarf snaps, his whole life collapses like an ark with its keystone removed. The fury of a dwarf overcome with grudge hatred is stark and harsh. They are unremitting in their violence, and forgiveness is not in their nature. Instead, they are grown cold, having no more mercy in them than granite. During such periods, even their allies, unless they be barbaric of nature such as Sigmar in the days of old, will turn their eyes from the cataclysmic and all-consuming wrath that dwarfs unleash. In all but the richest of clans and holds, a dwarf is expected to supply and maintain his own arms and armor. This is no issue, as most dwarfs treat their gear of war as treasured family heirlooms, handing down axe and shield, hammer and mail coat through the generations, presenting them to a young dwarf when he comes of age. Some clans, such as the Gold Shields or the Iron Hammers, have developed their conventional gear of war to ensure that their regiments are bold and uniform, while others show their allegiance through more subtle colors or symbols. Nothing crazy here with the dwarf warriors, though. They have very stalwart. They're very. That's really the backbone of the dwarf army. Is that there's nothing overly insane from unit to unit. You're not going to be, oh man, these guys have a wide sweeping armor piercing ability in the tabletop at least, or these guys are just they have murderous prowess and they coat themselves in the blood of their enemies and it gives these bonuses. Dwarf warriors are simple. They have ancestral grudge, relentless, resolute, shield wall, and we see this represented directly in Total War Warhammer, right? We know that the dwarf warriors themselves have charge defense against large foes. That is that mirror of that shield wall capability. And it plays very well into the overall kind of feeling of the dwarf army. They have their magic resistance. They have their kind of innate stalwart capabilities in their defense. A pretty simple little warrior here, but nonetheless a very furious one. It is a little wide sweeping in its description of the dwarf warrior. I'm like, okay, it's just the warrior here, man. We still have so many other places to go here. These guys can't be the beater of worlds just yet. So without further ado, let's move forward down the roster list here, huh? And what better way to talk about the dwarf warriors than to talk about their ranged counterparts, the quarrelers and the thunderers. Since the dwarfs first settled the World's Edge Mountains, they have used the crossbows to slay their foes at range. The earliest crossbow designs were made of stout iron oak reinforced by metal bands, although these days some clans prefer the forged steel versions. Regardless of the material they are made from, dwarf crossbows are deadly weapons, able to drop a black orc in its tracks or, with enough dwarfs firing in concert, even take down a rampaging giant. When the clans are called to fight, some dwarves arm themselves with crossbows and join the battle as quarrelers. These formations are tasked with raining bolts down upon their foes, a task they perform with orderly zeal. Quarrelers seek to thin down the enemy's ranks, punish units attempting to outflank their own forces, and engage in ranged duels with the foe's missile-armed troops. Dwarfs have never taken to bows, partly because they do not suit their short physical stature, but also due to the limitations of such weapons in confined tunnels. Powerfully built dwarf crossbow can easily fire shots that outdistance the puny bows used by goblins. The crossbow bolts pack enough punch to devastate lightly armored foes. With typical dwarf precision, a unit of quarrelers will unleash its hail of bolts, reload, take aim, and fire again. Protected by heavy armor and their own sturdy constitutions, it is a rare day when an enemy, even one with more skilled marksmen than the dwarfs, can win a long-range shooting contest against a unit of quarrelers. Or, of course, should the enemy approach near enough to engage the quarrelers in close combat, they will find hardened warriors eager to put their axes to work as well. While the devotees to the handgun have grown over the years, they have not replaced the crossbow. There are many clans that prefer the range of the crossbow, while the most traditionalists simply rile against any form of technological progress and the regrettable lack of elbow grease needed to fire a handgun, instead of winding a crossbow winch to reset its formidable shot. Not surprisingly, some of the less wealthy clans even grumble over the cost of black powder. Now here's our Thunderers. It took many, many years after the dwarves had discovered black powder for the handgun to become widely used by any save the engineers. Now, most clans, even those that live in the wilderness, can field whole regiments of Thunderers, the name given to the handgun-equipped units. Standing in closely packed ranks, Thunderers take aim and then discharge their handguns, unleashing a thunderous fury and a cloud of gun smoke. Although not quite as long range as a crossbow, the sturdy dwarf handgun packs an even deadlier shot. Its bullet fired with such velocity it can tear through armor and better take down more heavily protected foes such as Chaos Warriors. Being methodical, the dwarfs continue to load and fire in a disciplined manner so as long as their foes are within range. Even when the enemy advances close, almost right up on top of them, Thunderers will seek to get off one last shot. While the onset of bloodthirsty foes might cause lesser races to rush their aim, the steady coolness of the dwarfs, not to mention the precision make of their weaponry, ensures that every volley is fired with the same lethal accuracy as the last, until the moment the Thunderers take up their axes and meet the foe's charge in the bloody press of close combat. Although dwarfs show great solidarity in the face of outsiders, there is some degree of rivalry between the regiments of Thunderers and Quarrelers. Given the bitter nature of dwarves, this is not always a good-natured rivalry. Although not prone to murder or betrayal, as are so many other weaker races, many a good drinking bout has turned into a bloody brawl when the millennia-old question gets raised, which is better, crossbow, or the handgun. Great little unit here as well. The nice thing about Thunderers and Quarrelers, though, is that they, at the root of them, they are warriors. They are dwarf warriors. They have the same armor as a dwarf warrior. They have the same hand weapon. They have the same shield. You can even put great weapons on them, just like you can dwarf warriors. Well, on the Quarreler variant. And we see this represented very well in Total War Warhammer. Now, the one thing I wish that they did have, and again, I talked about this earlier, and it might be too much of an ask, but the shield wall ability is on the tabletop version of these 3 units, or 2 units. And it does give them that charge defense, and it is lacking in Total War Warhammer. I would love to see it there. I mean, these guys aren't the best melee combatants. I mean, I know it says that, okay, these are basically, at the end of the day, dwarf warriors, but dwarf warriors still have way better melee defense and a slightly better melee attack of 2 more. But nonetheless, they are supposed to be dwarf warriors, and I think you guys kind of get that gist from the lore on this, that these guys are, first and foremost, axe and shield wearing warriors. Secondly, the missile backbone, really, of the entire dwarf army. So let's move on down the line here to a little bit more of an elite troop, but not necessarily a fully elite troop. More of an older troop is a better way to put it. You guessed it, it's still Longbeards. And these guys are these, essentially the ancient members of the dwarf race. So let's go into this lore blurb here and talk about their pretty much one-to-one conversion into Total War Warhammer. Unless slain in battle or laid low by mishap, dwarfs live to a great age. The relative length and fullness of a dwarf's beard indicates how old and therefore wise he is. Hence, dwarfs never trim their facial whiskers. If dwarfs are ever in any doubt as to how to proceed, they look to the dwarf with the longest beard to tell them what to do. This is invariably the wisest solution. In warfare, the dwarfs look to the eldest and most experienced of their fighters to steady their battle lines. These regiments of battle-scarred veterans, known reverently as Longbeards, are as solid, steady, and sometimes as worn as the mountains themselves. Longbeards have fought in more wars, beaten more enemies, and endured greater hardships than any young dwarf can possibly imagine. They constantly grumble about how today's goblins are far smaller and weedier than they used to be, and how nothing is as well made as it was in their day. No young dwarf, as hot-headed and as tempestuous as he might be, would dare gainsay a Longbeard. After all, they have much more experience, and the beard to prove it. Admittedly, there are times when even the most stalwart of dwarfs begins to fray under the constant barrage of complaints ceaselessly launched out by their elders. However, these are born in respectful silence for a single reason. Longbeards have demonstrated their hard-won skills in battle time and again. They are unfaltering in their ways, disdainful of minor shifts of fortune that can send less experienced warriors into disorder or even panicked confusion. Whether a howling orc wah is smashing itself upon their raised shields, great boulders are splattering down within the ranks to hurl showers of bone and gore outward, or some new eldritch technology of the vile ratman is spewing purple and green tinged flames at them, Longbeards will close ranks, their gnarled faces disclosing no alarm, only a seething anger at their foe. A Longbeard unit in a battle line is likened to a reliable anchor bolt, or bulwark that stands fast and supports the other formations. Woe betide any beardlings who falter under the Longbeard's stern, if roomy eyes, for they will be admonished within inches of their very lives. It might not be easy for some units to hold the battle line within an earshot of a unit of Longbeards, yet it is also a great honor. Redoubles a dwarf's stoicism and makes even beardlings eager to prove themselves, or at least not give the Longbeards any further ammunition. So, when I was a kid, you'd walk up both ways to school on the hill. You'd walk uphill both ways. In the snow, covered in elves. That's the Longbeard kind of dogma. That's the the credo that they follow. So, they're very similar to your dwarf warrior, but they've got a better weapon skill. Clearly, so they've got better, basically a melee attack, if you want to put it that way. They've got your ancestral grudge, relentless, resolute, shield wall, the same kind of stuff that you usually get with any dwarf now, right? But the one thing that they do have is immune to psychology, and another thing they do have is old grumblers. Now, you do a number of leadership roles in tabletop that confer certain things, like a panic test, a march test, all sorts of stuff. But old grumblers allows you to use the Longbeard's leadership just in the same way that we see it in Total War Warhammer. So what it does in Total War Warhammer is it confers leadership onto any unit within range of the Longbeards, much in the same way that the Lord has a leadership aura. You get that same overlapping mechanic. You get charged defense against large foes for that shield wall mechanic. You get immune to psychology, which is, again, a one-to-one translation straight from Total War Warhammer into tabletop, or tabletop into Total War Warhammer, whatever you want to look at it. But a really great justice was done to these guys because they also can have their great weapon variant. So they're a lot of fun here. Sorry. Yes, great weapon variant. I was looking at the roster and I was like, wait, great weapon variant? That's the hammers. Yeah, no, Longbeard great weapon variant. You also even get, you know, the regiment renowned version, the grumbling guard, and you see how that plays very heavily into the lore here, right? You have these guys that are always just kind of like complaining and groaning and grumbling about something or other, but at the same time, they are the linchpin of any dwarf army because everyone looks to them to help guide them when the lord or the thane or a runesmith isn't nearby. So it gives you a good idea of how these Longbeards work. But let's start moving into the quote-unquote special units now, where we talk about stuff like the hammerers, the iron breakers, stuff like that. So let's get into, I guess, the meat and potatoes of the army. This is a unit I've really wanted to talk about since I started this video. In Total War Warhammer, what's the cheapest unit for the dwarves? The dwarf miner, right? At 325 points, it's the most entry-level unit of the dwarf army. Yet in tabletop, the miners had a much different role, and they were a special unit choice. They were not simply a core unit choice. So let's talk about these miners and how their role is different in both games. Even the smallest dwarf holds are populated with a fair number of miners. As an underground dwelling race, dwarfs always need experts at delving into bedrock, and this, coupled with the race's insatiable lust for gold, ensures that all mountain abodes are riddled with any number of deep shafts dug down in search of precious metals and gems. With their short but powerful build, dwarfs are ideally suited to mining, their strength and endurance allowing them to tirelessly wield pick, hammer, and shovel. While newfangled drilling machines and steam-powered wonder tools are now being put to use by progressive-minded clans, they will never replace the need for skilled and experienced dwarf miners. When dwarfs march to war, many mining clans form regiments to join the battle. As a point of pride, they do not bear axes, but instead wield the same heavy two-handed mining picks and mattocks they use to laboriously carve out tunnels. As it turns out, these well-balanced and sturdily made tools work equally well whether digging into bedrock or hacking apart goblins. Because tunneling in the deeps is dangerous work, miners constantly wear heavy armor and helms. Down the ages, this mail has served to protect them against rockfall and cave-ins, as well as turning aside such attacks as elf arrows or rusty skaven blades. Miners have a wide knowledge of subterranean tunnels, and if there is not already an easily accessible underground route to an enemy's vulnerable flank or rear, the miners will make one. Few enemies react calmly to the trudge of heavy boots behind them, and many a desperate battle has been won by miners arriving in the nick of time from an unexpected quarter. Led by a prospector, the most veteran member of the crew, miners can wreak havoc on a foe's battle lines. The longer and more established a dwarf mine is, the more likely it is to be augmented with mechanical contrivances. Great steam engines draw in fresh air or haul chains to tow wagon loads of rock out of the depths. Some miners even take to war with a few of their gadgets, such as blasting charges or a steam drill to aid in under-tunneling the enemy battle lines quickly. While the most conservative dwarves still grumble about these newer generations, stoutly wielding a pick to carve through a foe and winning the battle go a long way to aiding acceptance. So, in tabletop, you always had some sort of, for lack of a better word, I'll use the word vanguard deployment. It was ambusher special rule in tabletop is what it was called, or you would deploy outside of during the vanguard deployment stage, and you deploy differently than you would normally. Now, the miners fit that role, which was typically affixed to stuff like Shadow Warriors, or Shades, or Dark Riders. Well, they're a little bit different with fast cavalry, but still, the role of those guys was mainly to focus down artillery pieces that the rest of the army couldn't reach, especially with dwarves, which only have a movement of 3 in tabletop. So you really have to worry about that back line that can really pepper your army. That's why you have such heavy armor, such shields that you can use to really take advantage of really defending yourself against so much range fire. But the miners were really there to just kind of put an end, or at least a threat, to any kind of backline play in tabletop. Now, we do loosely see that used in Total War Warhammer, because they do have Vanguard deployment. So that's a thing. I do appreciate that. But that's it, really, right? I mean, these guys, they can't tunnel up from the ground like you can Skaven, which would be kind of cool. Maybe a little OP, but kind of cool if you could do it within reason, right? Like, maybe they have like innate stock or something. I don't know how you make that direct translation. Or if it was an activatable ability where you could dedicate food to it like you can in campaign with the Menace Below, where you've got something like a minor ambush or something. There's a pun there, minor or minor. But still, something where you could use these guys to a little bit more of an ambushing kind of role. And that's what they're meant to be. And they can upgrade to blasting charges. Miners use black powder to blast their way to valuable mineral deposits. Needless to say, this destructive force has proven useful in tight spots during battles and sieges. So flaming attacks, AP, a lot of the same characteristics that we get from the actual blasting charges, only the actual blasting charges just do flaming attacks. They don't actually have AP. Now, there's one other item here. Steam drill. This steam drill is a common piece of mining equipment that has proven its useful on the battlefield. Really, what it does is it affects the ambusher special rule, and you're allowed to re-roll certain things that affect that and how they arrive on the battlefield. So it doesn't really have a place in Total War Warhammer. I can see why Creative Assembly kind of looked at this and said, well, how the hell are we going to incorporate this into the game in a meaningful way that pays an homage to its rule? You really can't, not in a good way. So I'm quite all right with them not having this in the game. If they did include it in the game, I would appreciate it as maybe an activatable ability that would allow for additional damage against a gate, like a siege gate in campaign. That's the only way I could really see it having a lot of use, or maybe damage against a wall. But again, these guys don't attack walls, they can attack gates. They have the ability to, well, they do extra damage against gates. Maybe just giving them the siege breaker capability that we see on large creatures or on certain lords. I think that would be maybe a nice little additional nod to the miner. It might make them a little OP, but at the same time, I don't think the dwarves have a huge problem with breaking through gates, you know, what with all the artillery they've got. So I think this is just a nice earlier way, nice early game way to take advantage of breaking open a gate. So that is your dwarf miner, which is again a much different role than what we see in Total War Warhammer as far as being a bottom tier unit versus a specialist unit that is meant for ambushing. Let's get into probably one of the most famous and most beloved of dwarf units, the Slayers. Now, there are two different types of Slayers here. There's the unit type Slayer, and then there's the Lord Hero choice. We'll talk about those in a separate video of themselves because I want to go into more speculation about them, and I think it's just not as well suited to this. But Slayers. Slayers are the strangest and most deadly of all dwarfs. They are outlandish, doom seekers, individuals who have wholly dedicated the entire fiber of their being to the hardest and most destructive life of battle they can find. Dwarfs are a proud people, and none of them cope well with failure or personal tragedy. The loss of family or horde is inconsolable to dwarfs, a fate that can seriously unhinge their obsessive minds. Likewise, the loss of honor, such as failing to uphold an oath or being forsaken in love, can cause a dwarf to forswear the fellowship and comforts of family, clan, and hold, opting instead for a life of self-imposed exile. Having broken ties with everything they once held dear, these dwarves leave behind all possessions save their axes. They take the solemn and binding vows of the Slayer cult, oaths which oblige them to forevermore seek death in battle at the hands of the most deadly enemy that they can find. Next, Slayers shave their heads save for a solitary crest, a fearsome plume, which they dye bright orange and stiffen so that it strikes out at alarming angles. Then they begin their quest for a glorious death, deliberately seeking out mighty targets to destroy, such as trolls, ogres, or even giants. The Slayer way of life A constant search for battle and foes invariably means that many achieve their ambition and are slain at the hands of ferocious beasts. Others, the least successful ones in a sense, survive, perhaps due to great martial skill or because they are the toughest or most determined. This natural selection weeds out all but the most exceptional of their kind, meaning that any slayer met is psychopathically dangerous, a warrior well honed at spotting and driving an axe into enemies' weak points. As slayers spurn armor or shields, those who live to fight on become heavily scarred and fearless monster killers, bitter fighters that band together to seek their doom, yet are incapable of deliberately fighting to lose. Upon his own death, a slayer will use his final breath to fuel one last attempt to strike a foe. In times of battle, slayers arrive from the wilderness to join a throng, lending their considerable combat skills to the dwarf cause. Many desperate wars have been won by the ferocity and sheer determination of the slayers. Although they prefer to hew down towering monsters at need, they will turn their axes to scything down any enemy. Even when bloodied and battered after a battle's end, they will pause only long enough to slake their thirst before beginning their death quest anew. Oh, chilling, right? Ooh. Now, the tabletop version of Slayer is pretty interesting. So you have all your typical rules, right? Ancestral, Grudge, Relentless, and Resolute. You, of course, don't have Shield Wall because you don't have a damn shield. But you have Unbreakable, which is great for this unit. They already have a high-ass leadership of 10. But they also get Death Blow, which we see in Total War Warhammer, right? So at the very last moment, you get to make another attack and to try and do some damage here. Now, on top of that, they have 3 other rules I want to go into. One of them is just called Slayer Cult. It just simply means that no one can join a Slayer unit that is not a Slayer. So that is kind of speaks to itself, right? This is not going to make its way into Total War Warhammer. Now, the 2 other ones here are Slayer, which means that you wound on a roll of 4 up no matter what. Unless, of course, your strength allows you to roll on a 3 or a 2 up. Now, that's pretty important in tabletop settings. That means you can do a lot of damage to pretty much everything in the game, regardless of their toughness, regardless of everything. So we see that kind of represented very loosely, very loosely in Total War Warhammer by giving them a high weapon strength, a considerable melee attack of 38, but mainly it's that anti-large because it just allows you to do additional damage to large creatures fitting into the whole Slayer mechanic here. There's nothing that outright gives you that glorious additional chance to hit. Not really, and that is unfortunate. But the other thing that they have here, and this is a kind of an interesting thing, or rule, mechanic, whatever you want to call it, called Slayer Axes. So the individual Slayer units can decide whether they want to be using, or whether they want to use, a great axe or a pair of axes before each combat, not before the overall game itself starts. So in Total War Warhammer, you choose Slayers who dual wield axes, or you choose Giant Slayers for 350 more points who use great axes, who have AP and anti-large. Don't know how I feel so much about the mechanic. I wanted Slayers to have AP, so it fits into it, I guess, right? When you think of their profile and how they hit on a 4-up, it almost just sounds like giving them AP makes more sense. But I guess I understand. I think it'd be kind of cool if they had a toggleable ability where they could switch between either anti-large or dual axes at maybe the beginning of a fight, or maybe you have like a 60-second or 90-second cooldown. That again might be very overpowered. I'm thinking of things more in line with the essence of the rules, not in striking a balance between what would make the most sense from a Total War standpoint. That's not my job. That's someone over there in Creative Assembly, like Duck or something, who does all the balance. I don't do that. I talk about stuff that would be really cool. So Deathblow, though, we do see this represented 100%. You get that ability that with hit points under 20%, you get an increase to your AP and an increase to your weapon damage percentage. So this is a nice nod to that without making it an outright additional like direct damage attack or anything like that. So I do appreciate their roles there. So that talks about our Slayers here. Again, some of people's favorite units in the Dwarf army, and one of the most iconic. They're on like every White Dwarf. They're on a lot of different books from Black Libraries has just a massive picture of a Slayer. There's that one very iconic picture. I think it's the 5th edition book of the Dwarfs that has a bunch of Slayers on the front of it. They're also in the Grand Slayer army of Storm of Chaos, all that kind of action. Now, there are the Dragon and the Demon Slayers, and the reason I'm going to separate them into their own videos because I want to go deeper into the connotations of what these guys might be like in Total War Warhammer 3, more importantly, because if we do get demons in 3, the Demon and the Dragon Slayer has to have a very specific role. It has to have a lot of things attached to it that would make them competitive to a demon in Total War Warhammer that they don't have in tabletop, just as a result of having access to stuff like runes, which you don't have again in Total War Warhammer. So let us move on down the line of our special units into the Hammerers. Now these guys hold a pretty special place in my heart because they're really cool. I've always really liked the way Hammerers look, but they're not quite my favorite. We'll talk about my favorite next. But the Hammerers are incredible from a lore standpoint, so let's jump into these guys. The most skilled warriors in a dwarf hold are the Hammerers. They are individuals from different units and perhaps even clans who have proven themselves in uncountable battles, showing not just great strength and deadly martial prowess, but also steadfast loyalty and a bold and courageous nature. They are formed into a hard-hitting shock unit, a force capable of breaking enemy formations the way a heavy maul hammer crushes shale. In addition to being a formidable fighting unit, the Hammerers are often used as a Thane or Lord's personal bodyguard. Duty to a liege is a sacred thing to dwarves. An individual bound by oath to his lord will fight all the harder, and for the leader of the throng, a Hammerer will gladly give his life rather than face the dishonor of failure. A king surrounded by his Hammerers is the keep in the center of the throng, grim and unyielding, a living personification of the indomitable dwarf spirit. Of course, the allegiance goes both ways, and it is a lord's duty to properly equip these hand-picked units and to seal the oath between them. The symbol of the bond between a lord and his Hammerers is the weapon they carry. Each is given a heavy but perfectly balanced great hammer, which is often made of gromrel. Outfitted in heavy, well-polished dwarf mail, Hammerers wade into combat wielding their great weapons. They swing their hammers in sweeping arcs, hitting their enemies with such vigor that only enchanted or hell-forged armor can withstand the force of their blows. With the cracking and crumpling, the whirling hammerheads send up gory debris as splintered shields, cracked bits of armor, and even heads or limbs are thrown into the air by the sheer force of the impact. Dwarf battle lines have been known to cheer at the sight of the great hammers rising and falling around their king's banner, beating out a rhythmic noise that is not unlike the deep booming industrial sounds made by the vast drop hammers found in the larger dwarf forges. As the most elite warriors, hammers enjoy a high status within their hold. When not personally shielding their thane or king, they are tasked with guarding key elements such as the throne room or front gate. Larger strongholds will have many regiments of Hammerers, and these often become known by the name of what or whom they guard, such as the Peak Gate Guard of Carrick Norn, or the Drakebeard Guard, the Hammerers assigned to guard Thane Ul Hammerhand of the Drakebeard clan in Carrick Cadron. So we see now exactly where we get the Peak Gate Guard, right? We get the double origin story here. And the Hammerers themselves are much like we see in Total War Warhammer, you know, these elite units. Now, they do have a stubborn capability, or mechanic, which I wish made its way into Total War Warhammer. It didn't really kind of translate the way I had wanted it to. I, for some reason, thought that the High Elves had it with their White Lions, but they actually don't. The way the stubborn mechanic really works is it really helps out when it comes to leadership stuff. Not necessarily an immune to psychology, but they can re-roll failed leadership. So I would look at that as kind of like an additional boost to their leadership. I mean, at 75... I'm sorry, at 80, it's not a terrible leadership, but I think that they should really kind of pay an homage to that stubborn. But they do have shield wall, because Hammerers in tabletop don't all necessarily just use their hammers. They do have shields that they can access. This, of course, didn't make a translation into Warhammer, but there's one ability I want to talk about here. It's called King's Guard. Now, the way that this works is that the King's Guard can accept challenges for the general in the tabletop. Clearly, we don't have that kind of mechanic in Total War Warhammer. Now, the Hammerers, I would like if they had some sort of passive that would give them, or I'm sorry, I wish that they had the Guardian passive. Maybe not the actual hammerers themselves, but maybe the peak gate guard having, other than having sundering, which is I think really cool, and it plays into the role that they've created for them in Total War Warhammer. The Total War Warhammer versions of the hammerers are these damage dealing shock troops that are meant to just do tons and tons of AP damage. I get it. They're not supposed to be even though they have 100 armor and quite a bit of melee defense at a whopping 34, they're by no means, you know, the Iron Breakers, which can just stand through all the damage in the world. I guess that's what they wanted to do, is drive a direct wedge between the Iron Breakers and the Hammerers. Iron Breakers being the less offensive version of the Hammers, which are the more the more offensive version of a Dwarf Warrior. I guess you can kind of look at it that way. Like, the Dwarf Warrior is at the bottom. The Iron Breaker is a super tanky version, whereas the Hammer is a super damage-oriented offensive version. So you're kind of looking at like that, I suppose. You want to break it in that kind of distinction. But I love the Hammers. I think they're a really awesome unit. But really, to me, nothing holds a candle to the next unit we're about to talk about. Again, I think Hammers having that King's Guard ability in one way or another would fill them out a little bit more. They seem very bland. And to be totally honest, there are not many matchups that the Hammerers make sense over simply taking Longbeards with great weapons. You did get a substantial benefit or a boost in your weapon strength, and a very significant increase to melee attack, but at 1100 points, they're quite costly. And on top of it, Hammerers with great weapons also get the ability to buff the leadership of things around them, and they get charge defense against large foes. So they take advantage of the shield wall ability that the Hammerers should have. In addition, Longbeards are also immune to psychology, so you get too much benefit on a defensive standpoint for the total dedication to offensive that you get with Hammers, that I think just makes them fall a little short. So let's jump into our next unit, my favorite unit in the Dwarf roster, the Iron Breakers. Let's read these lore blurbs, so just jump right on into them, huh? Most of Kara's Angkor lies beneath the surface of the world, from the towering vaults and labyrinthine galleries of the holds to the endless tunnels of the underway. Adjoining these are the shafts of countless mines sunk deep in the bottomless dark. Many of these passages have been infiltrated, penetrated by the gnaw tunnels of Skaven or the mushroom-filled holes of the night goblins. The blackness of the underworld is also home to other monsters, crawling horrors and slinking beasts unknown to surface dwellers. The dwarf barricade themselves in intrusive passageways and build gates to block incursions from below, but even so, constant vigilance is needed. To safeguard the deepest and most dangerous passages, the dwarfs call upon the Iron Breakers. Clad from head to toe in suits of Gromrel armor, Iron Breakers can survive in a treacherous world of rockfalls and sudden ambush. They stand resolute, barring danger from advancing beyond their post. It is an honor to be selected to join the Iron Breakers, for they are trusted to protect the Hold's most vulnerable entrances. Only the strongest and bravest are accepted into their ranks, but the Dark offers no vainglory, and those warriors who choose a path of greater ambition must seek out the Hammerers. To serve as an Iron Breaker, a dwarf must take vows to stand bold, even if no king, lord, or thane is near. Behind and above him are the beardlings, treasure troves, ancestral tombs, and very halls that the forefathers of his race carved out of rock in ages past. Before and below an Iron Breaker will be only the dark, the all-consuming blackness that hungers to grasp everything into its clutches. Iron Breakers are trained to fight in tight formations, wedged into the confines of narrow tunnels. They find defensible positions and let the enemy break upon their overlapping shields as waves crash into rock. Impervious, implacable, and unmoving, they form a living line, Gromrel hard, that holds back the flood terror that lurks in the dark below. Enemies fall before their axes like winter wheat before the scythe, and blows clang harmlessly off their nigh-impervious armor or are caught and deflected by their sturdy shields. Each regiment of Iron Breakers will have a veteran, a grizzled unit leader known as an Iron Beard, who knows the undertunnels like the back of his hand. It is an Iron Beard's duty to maneuver the unit into a favorable position and to call out the battle formations such as the Box of Iron, the Steel Square, or so on. Such is the prowess of the Iron Breakers, they will often be called upon to fight on the surface, aiding the throng in time of muster. However, for each battle under the light of the sun or moon, the Iron Breakers will have fought dozens in the deep dark beneath the mountain. These awesome special forces type units here. I mean, they're not going behind enemy lines here, but they kind of hold that line. Like they really kind of paint this so awesomely in the lore as that like these guys are bastion against the dark. They're at the very deepest portions of the mine, the furthest frontier bastions of the actual hold itself in the dark, holding the line against these Skaven, these night goblins, these orcs. I really love that the portrayal of the Ironbreakers, and they're just badasses to me. So they get the typical rules: Ancestral Grudge, Relentless, and Resolute. They do not get Shield Wall, but what they do get is Shield Wall of Gromroll, which is an additional bonus on top of the already great bonus of Shield Wall. So that makes a pretty good conversion into Total War Warhammer. We've seen Shield Wall as charge defense against large, right? We've seen that kind of represented across multiple units so far that we've talked about. Now, the way that they do it with Ironbreakers is it gives them charge defense against all, which is a pretty cool, really significant way of doing it, and I really like it. And on top of it, they've got Gromroll armor, so they're supposed to be these very tanky, very... Gromroll armor is probably one of the best armors next to some of... Every single race has got like their best armor. For High Elves, it's Dragon armor, which gives you a 2-up save and your resistance to... oh god, what's it called? Fire. So, you know, everyone's got that kind of, you know, special touch. And I believe, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section, I believe that the Ironbreakers next to, I want to say, Chaos Warriors Chosen, have the best armor in the game at 125. The Chosen themselves have 120, so they just went out at 5. The big difference, of course, being Chosen have silver shields of defense, whereas Ironbreakers have bronze shield. But again, they still have 68 melee defense, which is quite significant, winning out 8 over the Chosen, which have 60. Now, on top of it, we do get those blasting charges, right? We've seen the blasting charges on the miners already, but these are a little bit different, so let's talk about these. The Cinder Blast Bomb. These are small grenades thrown by hand, whose shrapnel is especially deadly in close confines. Now, in tabletop, these things are a little bit different than they are in Total War Warhammer. They are armor-piercing. They're not flaming attacks like the miner's charges are, because those are, in addition to being flaming attacks, they're also AP. So we see something a little bit different here. I think, as I definitely, and I agree with these not being AP oriented. I think it might be just too much for one unit to have. I mean, they do explosive armor piercing damage of 12, which is pretty cool. But the fact that these aren't flaming and aren't AP is just a way to make them a little bit more tanky. Or I'm sorry, not tanky, a little bit more balanced, because they are so tanky. Otherwise, they're going to have done a ton of damage to things that are supposed to have killed them, like Hargoneth Executioners, Swordmasters of Hoeth, you know, Foot Squires, Great Swords, things that are AP anti-infantry that are supposed to be bread and butter against these things. This is kind of a way to balance that out, or else the blasting charges would do so much damage, or Cinder Blast charges would do so much damage to any unit approaching them that I'd be like, holy shit, well, I guess the Ironbreakers will win this one. And they're no slouchers in combat. They still have a 30 melee attack, which isn't significantly huge, but it is above a Dwarf Warrior, which is 22. So they're there to really kind of hold the line for you. And you see this represented in their lore. You see this represented in their overall place in Total War Warhammer, right? These guys are meant to just stay in the center, hold that line, keep it true, while the rest of your army can kind of rally around it. So let's now talk about one last thing in the special region. We've talked about miners, we've talked about hammers, Ironbreakers, and Slayers. Now, this last unit we're going to talk about, or this last selection we're going to talk about, is going to be multiple selections, and it's going to bridge that gap between special and the rare unit choices. Naturally, that is the Dwarf Artillery, the Organ Gun, the Flame Cannon, the Grudge Thrower, the Bolt Thrower, all of which are really marked under the same general entry in the 8th edition army book. So we're going to kind of blaze through these pretty quickly here. We're going to go into the Cannon, the Grudge Thrower, and the Bolt Thrower, which are special choices, and then end things on the Flame Cannon and the Organ Gun, which are rare choices. Now, these are very quick little lore blurbs in and of themselves, and for the most part, there's no real reason for me to jump very in-depth into all of the individual rules for these. We'll maybe stop a little bit on the Flame Cannon and the Organ Gun, which have a little bit more in-depth rules, but for all intents and purposes, the cannon is a cannon. There's really nothing crazy about the cannon that makes it different than what it is in Total War Warhammer. In fact, the fact that it's got AP is a nice bonus that I guess you could say, is not inherent in cannons, but cannonballs in and of themselves do a range of very terrible amounts of damage. The Grudge Thrower is got its own set of mechanics that are special to Total War Warhammer, especially the Goblobber, which is talked about in its lore. And the Bolt Thrower is for all intents and purposes, a very normal and very bland artillery piece. It's got the smallest lore blurb in the entire book. Let's jump into our dwarf artillery, starting with the cannon. Cannons were first made by the dwarfs of Zufbar, although now many of the larger strongholds make them their own. One of the most potent of war machines, a cannon can shatter the most heavily armored foe, pour shot into massed enemy formations, level a foe's cities or fortifications, and topple the largest of monsters. They are, however, somewhat temperamental devices. Even the best forged cannons in the world, those made by the dwarfs, naturally, are subject to occasional malfunction. The slightest crack or premature ignition of a black powder can result in devastating accidents. In addition to the cannons housed within strongholds, many clans maintain a number of cannons that can join a throng on the march. These are hauled into overlooking positions on the battlefield, where their long range and potent shot can dictate the course of the enemy's actions. Given the quality of their make, many cannons have been in service for a number of centuries and are revered by their crew. Again, very simple, very normal, just a cannon, nothing special here. If we're taking a look at the actual profile of the cannon in Total War Warhammer, it plays heavily into exactly what it's supposed to be, an anti-large AP thing. AP artillery piece. Of course, AP characteristics of its profile are definitely outmatched by the organ gun, and that is very true to the way things are in tabletop as well. And the flame cannon definitely steps itself up, and I'd say the Grudge Thrower too steps itself up in the anti-infantry department, but the cannon nonetheless is the king of destroying dragons on the battlefield. But without further ado, let's just jump on over. Like I said, we're going to go through these pretty quickly. The Grudge Thrower, of course, being our next one. Catapults were one of the earliest of the dwarf-made war machines and have been used to command the approaches that the dwarf holds for many millennia. During the War of Vengeance, so great was their fury with the elves that the dwarves began the practice of inscribing grudges on the rocks being used as ammunition. This custom stuck, and many crew believe that the engine is only as good as the grudges it throws, and therefore spend a great deal of time carving their anger directly onto the shaped stone ammunition. Grudge throwers are still used by all dwarf holds, and over the long years, there have been many famous engines whose renown has spread far and wide across the Karaz Angkor and beyond. Perhaps most famous of all was the Goblobber, a legendary catapult which drove off a great many greenskin attacks during the Goblin Wars. Although this was more down to the crew's use of live gobbo ammunition rather than pure accuracy. Awesome, right? I love that bit about the Grudge Thrower. And again, we haven't talked about this in this video, but the dwarfs themselves didn't always have access to gunpowder. We've heard that kind of talked about with the Thunderers. We've heard it talked about now with the Grudge Thrower text. But the cannon, the Thunderers, the dwarf engineer as a whole, when it comes to it being like a gunpowder master, is a very late dwarven invention, or I guess innovation. Dwarves, for the most part, were used to using crossbows, were used to using grudge throwers and bolt throwers to attack their, well, I guess now their most ancient of foes, the High Elves. And they use this during the Great War of Vengeance, and it talks about so many of these prolonged sieges that took a long time because the dwarfs didn't have access to gunpowder, and the elves really had a mastery of all things archery related. So you have the stalwart defensive abilities of the dwarves matched with the kind of unmatched, peerless approach to archery that the elves. This is of course pre-wood elves. The unmatched archery of the elves, and you kind of have this ultimate clash right here. And the Grudge Thrower is that kind of bygone era of it being the pinnacle of war machines and having it kind of stepped down in the time since cannons and organ guns and flame cannons have come so far to the fore. Now, the Grudge Thrower in and of itself in Total War Warhammer is got definitely a much different approach than the cannon. It is your entry-level anti-infantry kind of artillery piece. The organ gun, of course, being, the flame cannon kind of being its bigger brother in a bit of different ways, you know. Both the organ gun and the flame cannon both have a very specific role, and it's just mulching down things. But the flame cannon, definitely goes for the unarmored approach, versus the organ gun goes for the armored approach for sure. But that puts an end to our grudge thrower. Let's jump on over very quickly to our bolt thrower and kind of shore that little lore blurb up as well. And if the grudge thrower was an old artillery piece, the bolt thrower is the first artillery piece of the dwarfs, really, as far as chronologically goes. Tried and true, many clans still swear by the bolt thrower, a war machine that the dwarves have used since the days of the ancestor gods. Bolt throwers are large versions of crossbows, able to fire a dwarf-sized bolt over a long distance. Reliable and accurate, some bolt throwers have been in service for many thousands of years, yet they can still bring down a flying wyvern or skewer a troll. Again, very tried and true. They're ancient weapon from ancient times. Not really a whole ton worth going on into here. They are the cheapest artillery piece in the game, tabletop and Total War, and they really have a very specific role, that kind of AP anti-large monster hunter, more or less. I mean, arguably the cannon is better, but that's not really, if you're trying to get some cheap stuff in there, it's got a different role altogether. Now, in Total War Warhammer, the bolt thrower has a very specific role that the other artillery pieces don't thrive at as well, and it is sniping out other artillery pieces. It has a range of 340. Now, that is, of course, 100 shorter than its cannon counterpart, but it can outright gib after, I think, a shot or two of certain artillery pieces. So that's what it's really good for, is a very cheap artillery hunter. At only 550 points, there's very few things that kind of really challenge it for its point costs in attacking other artillery pieces. So that's really kind of where it has its niche in at least Total War Warhammer goes. But I want to jump now into the two rare choices, the two big bad boys of the artillery section, the flame cannon and the organ gun. Now, the organ gun itself doesn't really have a huge sweeping amount of lore here. This is, again, a very small little paragraph, but it has a very strong place in tabletop, and an even stronger place in Total War Warhammer as far as a very niche, or at least a very focused viewpoint here. So let's get into the organ gun. An invention of the Dwarf Engineers Guild, the four-barreled organ gun is so called because its array of barrels resemble the pipes of a musical organ. The organ gun's barrels are smaller and lighter than an ordinary cannon's, which means it lacks the extreme range and hitting power, but has the advantage of firing a barrage of shots all at the same time. With a well-placed salvo and its barrels firing to maximum effect, an organ gun has been known to blow away entire enemy units at a time. And that's really its role. In tabletop, it had a range of 30, which is pretty sizable still. I think a cannon has a 36 or 42 or 46. I can't remember. 48 actually, I think it is. But still, range of 30 with a strength of 5 and AP. Now, you have misfires that can go off here and minor jams, and that kind of results in stuff like the organ gun can blow up, or you just have a small jam that is a -1 to hit. But the cool thing here is you roll a dice, and those two die together. I'm sorry, you roll 2 die, and those 2 die together dictate the total number of shots coming out of the organ gun. So you can really ramp this thing up and get quite a few shots out that could decimate a heavily armored unit almost entirely. With armor piercing, I mean, as long as it hits, it's going to go all the way through that armor unless they have a ward save. So you can see in tabletop, this thing was the bane of like Chaos armies, Bretonnian armies, even High Elf armies and Dark Elf armies really suffered from this thing. Wasn't really a big of a deal with people like the Demons of Chaos because, well, of course, they have all ward saves because why the fuck not? But when you have stuff like heavy toughness, or I'm sorry, high toughness, high wound units like the Ogres even, this thing can really do quite a bit of damage because the Ogres had small unit count, monstrous infantry. So you had like maybe 12 in a unit, and if you shot out 12 shots, they're going to absorb 3 or 4 wounds each, depending on what kind of unit it is. But you have armor piercing in there, so you can really mulch through stuff like Ogres. Even Black Orcs fall very quickly to this stuff. So this was a way to really be a terror on the battlefield to units that would otherwise be able to kind of stand through the majority of shots of, say, Thunderers or Quarrelers, stuff like that. The organ gun has always kind of had that role, the same role that it does have in Total War Warhammer. Now, in Total War Warhammer, of course, it is an AP powerhouse, right? It has 334 missile damage, and of that 334, a whopping amount of it is dedicated almost directly to AP. And of course, with a range of 300, which is still slightly shorter by 140 for the cannon itself, it can deliver a ton of damage to Chosen, to Phoenix Guard, to Grave Guard, to any number of heavily armored units in Total War Warhammer. It fits that exact same niche. It's not going to be able to take down your dragon as easily as, say, a cannon is. It's not going to be the terror in the night to a Shaggoth. But any heavily armored army, like those Chaos, like that Bretonia, like we hopefully will see with Ogre Kingdoms, who knows? With those armies, it is definitely a terror, and you have to put it out quickly, or else it is just going to mulch through the heavy, high-costing point portions of your army. And I like that it is made a good translation to Total War Warhammer, and that it is that definitely that backfield battery that just can destroy things, especially as it gets close. And if you've seen these things in action in the game, you see how they just mulch through stuff, and it's really awesome to see. So let's jump on over to our flame cannon, our last artillery piece, and the beginning, really, or with the organ gun and the flame cannon, of our rare selection. And unfortunately, I guess you could put this as the epilogue of our little video here together, guys. But by no means is that a bad thing, for we have saved the best for last, I assure thee. So the flame cannon is going to be a lot of fun here. So let's talk about our lore blurb. Let's go into some of the differing mechanics between them. There are a few weapons that can put fear into the heart of a foe, like a flame cannon. One of the deadliest inventions of the Engineers Guild, a volatile concoction of hot oil and molten tar is mixed within the flame cannon before air is pumped into the barrel. Soon the pressure inside is tremendous and the barrel is almost ready to burst. At precisely the right moment, the dwarfs place a burning oily wad into the nozzle and release the pressure. The mixture catches fire as it whooshes from the barrel in a leaping spurt. The burning oil arcs into the air towards the enemy ranks, and with a little bit of luck, lands in the middle of the foe, spraying boiling tar over them. For longer range shots, the dwarfs simply apply more pressure, and the most experienced crew know exactly when to release the straining valves to achieve maximum distance. Those crew who misjudge this subtle balance rarely get another chance. Enemies struck by flame cannons have their flesh melted off them in slough, leaving only scorched bones and a foul-smelling liquid that is best described as goo. Even the bravest of those who survive, after seeing their comrades so gruesomely reduced, have been known to flee immediately. The flame cannon does what you would exactly expect. It's a flamethrower cannon. I mean, there's no other way to divvy that up. But what I really like about the Total War version of the flame cannon is that it does a nod to that last sentence in the lore. It talks about how, oh man, holy shit, all my bros just got completely melted by that flame cannon. I am not doing too well. So the missile damage from the flame cannon causes burnt, which we've seen from some other flaming attacks. So it does a -8 penalty to the leadership of units. So we see that already with the way that flame cannons work in the rules of tabletop. So I really like that they've kind of done that really good nod to it, and I'm pretty stoked on that. I enjoy that they do those little kind of, hey, well, this is a really good portion of the rule. It's very in line with the essence of it. So let's kind of add that to this unit in Total War. Now, there is one thing missing here, and it's Sheet of Fire. And I would really love to see this added into Total War Warhammer, because I think the flame cannon in and of itself just doesn't get enough love. It's always kind of, yeah, I'll take the flame cannon for the laughs, for shits and giggles, because it's $12.50. It's the most expensive artillery piece of the dwarfs, even outside of the Goblobber, which was only at 900 and it's a regiment of renown. The flame cannon itself, it doesn't get a huge return because it has a very wonky kind of pathing with its shots. Sometimes they all don't land very properly. Even against Tomb Kings, who are all kind of really vulnerable to this, they can kind of move around quickly enough that the flame cannon can't fire as properly as it should. So I think it's got a little bit of a wonky mechanic to it. But the way Sheet of Fire works is basically the flamethrower, or I'm sorry, the flame cannon, the attendants, the crew of it, pump more steam into it to make, rather than a flamethrower style shot, a hyper kind of focused, supercharged flame shot. And it's a much shorter range, but it has a much higher strength, and on top of it, its flaming attack causes multiple wounds. So what would be really cool here is if you could use this as a one-time ability, or maybe even a 3-charge ability, almost in the same breath as a, well, dragon breath attack, where it does a quick, immediate blast outcharge of flame in a high AP flaming attack, short range burst. Something that's kind of like, okay, they're starting to close in on my flame cannon. Well, I'm going to use Sheet of Fire right now to try and just clear the way. I think that'd be a really awesome kind of like, oh shit button for this unit to make it have a little bit more umph to it. I mean, the flame cannons can fire all around if you kind of position them properly, but they kind of suffer from the same problems that the Iron Drakes do, where they just don't get enough damage out in time to really be worth their points. But I do think that tweaking the flame cannons, that Iron Drakes, the Skulder Guard, which we'll talk about all soon, would make them a lot more useful, especially with what we're going to hopefully see in the future with a lot more horde armies. I'm sorry, not horde armies, but fat armies that can really absorb that damage from the flame cannon without any repercussions. So if you have Sheet of Fire, we have a huge amount of ogres charging the line at you with mass amount of health pools. Use Sheet of Fire and you hopefully can char out a whole bunch of them before they actually beat the crap out of your flame cannons. That brings a close to our artillery pieces. Let's move through some other stuff of the rare selection of the Dwarf roster. Since we've talked so much about artillery though, I think it's a good pivot here into the Gyrocopters and Gyrobombers. Now, these two share two different unique roles. I think the Copter was a special unit and the Bomber was a rare unit, but we're going to just put both together because for all sake and purposes, they're the same when it comes to document them from Total War standpoint. So let's jump into the lore portions of both and the rules. So starting with the Gyrocopter. Gyrocopters are flying machines whose rotor blades are propelled by an ingenious lightweight steam engine. They can take off and land vertically, as well as hover in position over a spot. Although originally used to fly over difficult mountain terrain and to drop supplies and messages to beleaguered settlements besieged by foes, the Gyrocopter was soon tested over battlefields with great success. The main armament of a Gyrocopter is a steam gun. When the valve is released, this unleashes super hot steam from the engine that blasts out of the barrel with a hissing scream. Although its reach is short-ranged, a skilled pilot can bob and spin into perfect position to unleash this cloud of scalding death across the foe's ranks. Over the years, the Gyrocopter's firepower has been augmented with bombs with varying degrees of success. Originally, the pilot was responsible for lighting the fuse and throwing the bomb overboard while trying to fly and dodge enemy arrows. More recently, the Gyrocopter's small payload of bombs has been fitted into the craft's stabilizers. Gyrocopters were invented by the Engineers Guild, although it took many centuries before the flying machines gained acceptance from the more conservative dwarfs. As the legend goes, the inventor was inspired by watching dragons swooping down from inaccessible mountain crags. He combined the idea of wings with that of engines used to drive drilling machines, and then added flywheels from grinding machines to boot. Now, even small strongholds have an air fleet, and skilled engineer pilots are part of their throng. So you can see these guys have a pretty crazy little place in the lore here, right? They do have bombs, like we see in Total War Warhammer, but they're really meant to attack and harass. They're really meant to kind of be on the outskirts and do damage to the sides of units or even to artillery pieces. They're not meant to go toe-to-toe with things overall. They do have a pretty impressive profile with 5 toughness and 3 wounds, but only 2 attacks. So these things aren't meant to really fight things. They're really meant to just kind of attack, harry the line, be a harassing unit. Now, the way we see them in Total War Warhammer is that we have pretty much just that. There are an anti-infantry unit. They do have some bombs, the Gyrocopter bombs, that they can drop, and there's only a limited amount of them. I think there's only 2. And on top of that, they kind of fit that role nicely. Now, there is an upgrade for them called the Brimstone Gun. Yeah, I thought I had an E in it. The Brimstone Gun. Some Gyrocopters switch their steam gun for a Brimstone Gun, a modified version of the weapon used by the Iron Drakes. So the same ones that we see on the battlefield on foot, you see these guys mounted onto their Gyrocopters as well. Now, these things are pretty beastly. Armor piercing, dwarf crafted, flaming attacks, multiple shots, quick to fire. So these things have a lot of characteristics attached to them. And even when we look at the Total War Warhammer variant of them, they're a pretty beefy upgrade. I mean, you're talking about going from doing anti-infantry and 76 missile damage to now doing anti-large, flaming damage, 99 missile damage, and doing AP on top of it. So you do get a fat increase of 23 missile damage here, a further increase to your range as well. So the Brimstone gun really kind of fits that niche for the gyrocopter that was meant to really buff up its range damage. And at a pretty modest cost in tabletop, they've kind of contributed as well to Total War. 700 for the normal, 800 for the Brimstone gun. So it's almost foolhardy to not use the Brimstone gun version, because you get so much more attacks, or you get so much more value out of it in the in tabletop. In tabletop, though, the Steam gun used a template versus the Brimstone gun was a ranged target. So you couldn't hit as many units at once with the Brimstone gun, but at the same time, you were doing way more damage per shot with the Brimstone gun, in my mind, the way I kind of looked at it. Now, both of these units are kind of not overshadowed, but they go hand in hand with the bomber here. So the gyro bomber, let's go into this lore blurb as well. Since the first flight of the gyrocopter, engineers have been seeking ways to upgrade its payload. There were times, such as when green-skinned invasions filled the valleys, swarming up a mountain's flanks to besiege a dwarf stronghold, that gyrocopters buzzing around the flanks just wasn't going to break up the attack. With some reconfiguration, and by losing the heavy weight of the steam gun, the Engineers Guild were able to significantly increase the size and number of bombs carried. Thus was the gyro bomber invented. Initial tests against rampaging orcs proved successful, with the newly dubbed gyro bomber sowing patches of destruction along its flight path. However, while the bombs did rip holes into waves of oncoming attackers, the newly designed flying machine was not as capable at diving down to launch its bombs as was the gyrocopter. And furthermore, the larger bombs proved more susceptible to wind shear. All of this meant that the devastating payload was not always delivered on target. Teams of engineers advanced a slew of ideas, one of which turned out to increase the bomb's damage potential. By rigging the explosive content within the bomb canisters, the engineers found that they could set off a brief chain reaction, creating a sort of bouncing bomb that would land, explode, and then set off subsequent explosions. Named the Grudge Buster bomb, the engineers were naturally defensive about it. Bristling at suggestions that the bombs were less accurate, they stated that the bounces gave the ordnance a greater chance to strike its targets. Tests showed that while the Grudge Buster bomb might not be any more accurate, their multiple explosions wreaked more damage than ever. Armed with their impressive bomb racks and a nose-mounted clattergun, the gyro bombers stream over the dwarf battle lines, seeking to obliterate the foe's largest formations. Already, several flying formations have become famous, perhaps most notably the Skyhammers from Zufbar and the Blackhammer bombers of Karaz-a-Karak. So, with that, we get the origin story of our Skyhammer gyro bomber regiment of renown, right? Get this little, almost in the same way as we do for the Hammerers, like kind of a nice little nod at the very end of their lore blurb. Now, the bomb mechanic in tabletop had a little bit different, I guess you could say, approach to things. Both the gyrocopter and gyro bomber did have what was called armored copter, so they had a 4-up armor save, so they were pretty stalwart. But the bombers did a bombing run, and they could roll on a misfire chart, which could mean that the actual bomb would detonate in the hold of the actual bomber itself and do a lot of damage, or you do you do a normal amount of damage and it doesn't bounce, or you roll and only the model under the template central hole is hit, suffering a strength 4 hit. So basically, you've got the ability for the bomb to blow up on you, for the bomb to basically not bounce and just do a smaller portion of damage, or for it just to smack up dead on into a unit and hit it right in the head. So the misfire chart was something we don't see at all in Total War Warhammer, but I did want to bring it up because it's a pretty important portion of the bombing run, or the bombers and their bombing run capabilities. Now the clatter gun does AP, it's dwarf crafted, multiple shots, and quick to fire. So you see this again with a pretty good solid translation. You've got AP damage here. Now, the damage profile for the gyro bomber, yeah, I'll stick with that, is 1100 missile damage. And I'm not sure if that's from the clatter gun or if that is from the actual missiles themselves. I'm assuming it's from the bombs themselves. Although the Gyro Bomber bomb is an ability. So again, I'm not sure where that 1100 comes from exactly, or 1200 if you want to round up. Those of you know, feel free to let me know in the comments. Say, hey, that's actually from the bombs itself. We've tested it. Cool. I will totally believe you. Now, the Gyro Bomber of course, that's the big juxtaposition here, right? The Gyro Bomber has 11 bombs versus the Copter only having 2 bombs. The Copter's meant to really be up close and personal as far as doing range damage and supporting your front line, whereas the Gyro Bomber is supposed to fly over the whole entire unit and harry them. And we saw that in tabletop. I mean, man, I hated seeing these things in tabletop because they didn't do the most damage in the game because, I mean, you could shoot them down very quickly, but if they really got a chance to get over a unit, you could lose that entire unit so fast. And that is very true to a lot of stuff in the Dwarf artillery that we've kind of seen already, right? With the flame cannon, with the gyro bombers, with the organ gun. All these things have the potential to completely delete a heavily armored unit, especially since majority of them all do AP. I mean, the actual bombs from the bombing run do multiple wound D3 and armor piercing, and they hit it on a strength of 6. So they can really, really mess up your day depending on where you are in that blast ordnance and everything. So these things were a terror if done right. They didn't see a whole widespread amount of play in tabletop, and I think that's kind of true to what we actually see in Total War Warhammer. They're not in every single Dwarf competitive list, but they always are a really fun thing to bring as a very niche unit. I mean, you can use them amazingly against certain armies. I mean, you can use a Gyro Bomber actually surprisingly well against a Tomb King, to be totally honest. A little bit harder, but you can definitely get off with it. I mean, Skaven, that you can use them against as long as they don't have enough artillery. There's a lot of really fun matchups for the Gyro Copters as a whole. But hopefully that gives you guys a really good idea of how the gyros work. Let's move on over to our last 2-3 options in the rare list to shore up the remainder of our video here. And we'll go into the Rangers as our second to last choice. We see these represented in Total War in a number of ways, so we'll talk about the Rangers themselves and go into how they differ from the Bugman's Rangers and such. So Rangers are the long-ranged eyes and ears of most dwarf settlements. They patrol far from the safety of the hold, often spending long periods out in the wilderness, keeping watch on the dwarf's many enemies and tracking dangerous beasts. If it is they who explore hidden valleys, push through collapsed sections of the underway, and scale the cliff sides in search of new pathways. Rangers will hunt down and dispose of lone monsters or ambush small mobs of goblins, but when they confront larger creatures or enemy armies on the march, the Rangers send signals to the nearest outposts to alert them of the encroaching danger. While all holds are thankful for such services, that doesn't mean the Rangers are well respected. Rangers are a wandering lot, often moving between holds. After months surviving in the wilderness, far off the beaten track, they are at best weather-beaten and travel-worn. Most consider them to be outcast clans, desperate to earn their way back into a hold. Sometimes this is the case, but just as often, the Rangers turn out to be an independent-minded breed of dwarf, small groups from respectable clans that feel more at home on the mountainsides. Unlike most of their kin, they camp under the stars, moving from rough camp to rough camp. With such free spirits, it is no wonder that so many dwarfs are mistrustful of Rangers, generally believing them to be a bit unhealthy from breathing so much open air and exposing themselves so often to the sun. To survive on the harsh mountain slopes without the security of a nearby hold to fall back to, Rangers have learned to be stealthy and to fight in a manner unique for dwarfs. They are ambush hunters, experts at approaching the enemy from unexpected angles. Where possible, they will trigger avalanches, misdirect wayward foes over cliffs, or lead them into the teeth of an oncoming ice storm. Rangers are walking arsenals and carry a slew of different weapons. Crossbows to skewer foes at long range, throwing axes for close range slaying while on the move, and an axe for close combat, and, for truly imposing foes, great axes. They have learned to keep bedrolls, pots, pans, and climbing gear secreted in camps hidden along their mountainous routes, yet still they must carry all their provisions on their backs as well. When dealing with large enemy forces, Rangers will first attempt to forewarn all dwarfs in the invader's path, and then they will trail the foe, picking off stragglers and waiting for an opportunity to wreak havoc. In this way, when the enemy finally confronts a dwarf force, the Rangers will often be in the position to outflank the foe, arriving behind their battle lines to destroy war machines, pincushion lone wizards, or launch an attack to otherwise help gain an advantage for the dwarfs. Many times, a Ranger's greatest deeds go unwitnessed. Acts of sabotage, such as rolling gunpowder barrels downhill onto enemy camps, spiking the foe's water supplies with intoxicating agents. A battle-winning tactic, but also resource wasted on those that don't appreciate it. Or leading the wild beasts that haunt the mountain passes onto the enemy trail, allowing wild manticores or hungry wyverns to do some of their work for them. Still, no matter how many night goblin fanatics they lure into rock piles, many dwarf clans will give them only cursory thanks and little respect. Rangers are mysterious figures, and it is not surprising that many tales are told of their deeds. The most famous of their kind is a regiment known as Bugman's Rangers. Vengeance seekers who follow their brewmaster turning up out of the wilds with grim tidings before lending a hand in the battle that is sure to follow. Others too have grown in status. The Redbeards that haunt the High Pass, the grim survivalists called Ulthar's Raiders, known for the trail of goblin heads they leave on stakes near Carrick 8 Peaks, and the Frostbeard clan, hardy rangers who set clever traps to ensnare monsters in the slopes north of Karaz Karak. So if miners are your special forces that are melee related, Rangers are your definitely Rangers are definitely your special forces that are range related. Now, these do really fit. I kind of spoke, I got a little ahead of myself earlier. These really fit more into the role that Shades, Shadow Warriors fit into. Miners kind of fit more into, I guess, the role of fast cav, even though they're clearly not fast cav. They just kind of have that more stalwart ability. Rangers are scouts. They have the scout special ability in tabletop. They're ancestral grudge, relentless, resolute, same kind of things as normal. But them being scouts means they can deploy in a skirmish formation, meaning they're not in a standard regimental kind of block. And they kind of play heavily into the stock mechanic we see in Total War Warhammer. Now the Rangers, of course, come in 4 flavors. Rangers with great weapons, Bugman's Rangers, which are a little bit different here. They, of course, have immune to psychology. They get liquid fortification, which gives them their healing, or I guess a constant healing effect, in addition to having some charge defense versus large. And, of course, all Rangers are quote-unquote fast. Now, there's also the Ulthar's Raiders, which are not a Regiment of Renown version of Bugman's Rangers, but a Regiment of Renown version of Rangers with great weapons. But we get them with throwing axes, right? It was a little bit cooler, huh? A little more in line with what we kind of see in the book. Now, I love Ulthar's Raiders. I probably use them the most of any dwarf range unit. I don't know why. I always default to Rangers. I think they're a little bit cooler than Quarrelers. And I really like their lore a little bit more too. I like that they have stock. So all Rangers are a little bit harder to find on the battlefield at the initial onset, which I think is huge because when you're fighting a dwarf army, you almost always expect some sort of elaborate backline with onions and onions and onions of defensive layers. The Rangers allow you to have a little bit more of a straightforward, straight line that people go, oh, okay, well, he's got no backline. I'll just charge him headlong and boom, right into a whole entire rank of Rangers, including Ulthar's Raiders. Now, Bugman's Raiders have a little bit more of a, I guess you could say, not melee-centric role, but they are way better melee combatants than the rest of the Rangers. They only kind of pale in comparison slightly in certain areas to the Ulthar's Raiders. Now, the one thing too I like about the Rangers is how they've kind of honored what we talked about in the lore. They've got axes, they've got throwing axes, they've got great weapons, they've got crossbows, and you get that variety with the level of unit options that you have for the Rangers, including Bugman's Rangers. If Joseph Bugman is in your army, you can nominate 1 unit of Rangers to be a unit of Bugman's Rangers, which is basically like it's tabletop's version of a Regiment of Renown, because you didn't have Regiments of Renown in the literal sense that you do in Total War Warhammer, where it's a whole separate unit with a whole separate stat line and blah, 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 blah. Bugman's Rangers just got certain bonuses to their stat line, and there was only 1 of them allowed in the army. And it always talks about how the ending of the lore talked about it, right? These kind of guys who come out of nowhere and say, hey, something's coming. I'm gonna help you. And I love that role, how it's kind of these watchers in the dark. that come out of nowhere, assist, and then just leave as quietly as they came. So Rangers are a pretty cool unit to me in the Dwarf roster because it's very uncharacteristic for Dwarfs. I mean, the Dwarfs, you know, you think of like Thanes, you think of Hammerers, you think of Iron Breakers. You don't think of Rangers as really, really cool Dwarf units. And I will say, though, that the one thing I kind of don't like about the Warhammer universe as a whole is the heavy amount of hyperbole that is attached to any unit like the Ranger. Shadow Warriors, Shades, Way Watchers, Rangers are all in that same kind of, oh, they come out of nowhere, they kill everything, and then they leave. Oh no. You're like, well, fuck, these guys better be really damn good in the game, right? And they're not. They're never like, they're not amazing at all. I'm looking at their stat line. They're just, it's absolute rubbish. What they're meant to do is strictly to snipe out artillery pieces. If you kill out a lone caster, I'm surprised that the guy would have the, I'm surprised your opponent had that lone caster on his own, just sitting there. So they really only were used to snipe out those artillery pieces, maybe attack some range units, or help control a charge, stuff like that, screen out and control charges. That's really what they were used for. But again, nonetheless, I think that they have a really awesome lore, and I'm more than excited to talk about it. But let's jump over to our last entry in our list here today, guys, and that is the Iron Drakes. Now, these guys have a lot of really different stuff here, so let's just jump right in. The bitter underground wars that the dwarfs fight daily to protect their strongholds are evolving. As the dwarf foes come up with diabolical plans to get past a stronghold's protections, time and again, the dwarfs' courage and rune-enhanced weapons and armor have turned the tide, yet their foes have learned. When Skaven find the corridor blocked by unmovable ironbreakers, they call for their own loathsome countermeasures, warp flame-spewing fire throwers, gas grenades, or cobbled-together chopping machines. For their part, night goblins turn to mushroom-addled ball and chain-wielding fanatics, cave squigs, or troll mobs. For the dwarf's defense, the cost in lives is high. It was the Engineers Guild that invented the Drake Gun, a weapon with which fires a blast of alchemical fury, a searing bolt of blazing energy. Short range but incredibly potent, a single volley from a unit bearing Drake guns can halt the onrushing charge of enraged Mangler squigs. Ironbreakers who showed an aptitude with the Drake gun were further trained and formed into new units. When first used, even the Gromrel armor of the Ironbreakers struggled to protect against the intense heat generated by the fiery blasts. With the aid of runesmiths, new armored suits were developed, bearing runes of protection first designed to safeguard those who work in the high temperature of the massive forges. Now, when confronted by a foe capable of breaking through a wall of Ironbreakers, a new fighting tactic has been developed. Ironbreakers open ranks to allow the Iron Drakes to file past. With well-drilled precision and the barking orders of an Iron Warden, the dark is soon illuminated by molten blasts. The stalwart dwarfs blaze away as its attackers fall, their crumpled bodies still smoking with fist-sized holes burned through their flesh. The Iron Drakes have proven so effective that their services are pressed into action whenever a throng may fight. Now, you can see these guys are just straight up, they're Iron Breakers given flamethrowers. And the Drake Gun is actually different in tabletop than it is in Total War Warhammer. For instance, the Drake Gun is not a flamethrower. It does AP, it's dwarf crafted, it's got flaming attacks, and it's quick to fire, but it has a range of 18. It's not a template. You don't just simply put the flamethrower template down and go boom, steering up some Skaven motherfuckers. Nope, it's an outright, it's a focused beam is really what it definitely how the lore makes it sound to be, and how the actual rules definitely display it as. And the Drake Gun, or the Iron Drakes themselves, are still pretty stalwart combatants. They've got a 5 weapon skill, which is pretty substantial, to be totally honest with you. The majority of things have a 3 to 4, with 5 being a little bit above average there. So these guys can definitely do some damage because they also have what's called Forge-Proven Gromrel armor. This is a model with Forge-Proven Gromrel armor, has a 4-up armor save and a 6-up ward save. They also have a 2-up ward save against all hits with the Flaming Attack special rule. This is very similar to the Dragon armor that we see in the High Elves, that it gives an additional save to fire. And we see this conferred into the actual profile for Iron Drakes in Total War Warhammer. They have a 70% fire resistance. That is massive. So if anyone goes to go roasting these guys with other flaming attacks, or with a Dragon Breath that does flaming attack, it shan't go well for them. Now, here's where things get a little bit different. Now, of course, obviously the Drake gun itself isn't a flamethrower, but the Iron Warden can upgrade his Drake gun into either a brace of Drake fire pistols or a Troll Hammer torpedo. Now, we see Troll Hammer torpedoes as a whole unit in Total War Warhammer. The Troll Hammer torpedo is a cumbersome weapon fitted onto the end of a Drake gun in order to bring down large beasts. And it has a further range, a higher strength, no AP, and no Dwarf crafted or quick to fire, or flaming attacks for that matter. I'm sorry, it does have flaming attacks. It's got multiple wounds, flaming attacks, and slow to fire, meaning it shoots last. So, how do we see this translated though into Total War Warhammer? It's not the same at all, right? So the Iron Drake does a heavy amount of damage that is, for all intents and purposes, just strictly normal damage. It's not AP, but it does have the burnt special rule, and it is a flaming attack. Now the Troll Hammer and the Iron Drake standard, the Drake gun does anti-infantry. Now the Troll Hammer is anti-large, AP, with a lower missile damage, but a substantial amount of it dedicated solely to armor piercing. So you see that direct correlation there. And it has a little bit increase in range too, so it does. And the nice thing too is that the Troll Hammer torpedo arcs in this game, so it can go over your units and attack heavily armored units in your front line. If you ever want to see a really cool situation, have Iron Breakers, I'm gonna call them Iron Drakes, Iron Breakers with Troll Hammer torpedoes behind them, and you'll see some really cool shit. I promise you. I promise you. So it's interesting how they decided to do that. They said, well, the Troll Hammer torpedo is really cool, and it is meant for large beasts. Let's make it an anti-large, lower damage weapon here. And I like that. I like that they did that. But one thing I would have liked to see is the brace of Drake fire pistols added into the game. Drake fire pistols are deadly weapons, ideal for close range tunnel fighting. For those of you guys who have played Vermintide 2, you've seen the Drake fire pistols in the game. I would love to see a unit of Iron Drakes with Drake fire pistols. These guys are armor piercing, dwarf crafted, flaming attacks, multiple shots, quick to fire, but they have a significantly lower range of 12 inches versus the 18 inches of a Drake gun. So I would want these guys to be almost like we see with like zombie pirate gunnery mobs, right? With these guys with two pistols going all hog wild all over the place. How awesome that'd be to just see these pistol dual wielding Iron Drakes running downfield shooting to get into close combat. I think that'd be kind of nifty, or at least a very close range fire support these guys would pose. I mean, the one thing that obviously didn't transfer as well here is their ability to fight in combat. All of the Iron Drakes only have 20 melee attack, which is simply 2 less. Or I'm sorry, it is it is 2 less than a Dwarf Warrior, which has 22. So I would love to see the Iron Drakes actually have more melee attack. I don't know why they decided to have every single unit that is a range unit a decent melee combatant, for the exception of Iron Drakes, which are, from a lore standpoint, Iron Breakers with a torpedo gun. You know, it just doesn't really make a whole ton of sense to me, because they're still that heavily trained elite unit in the army. I mean, they have a really terrible melee defense too of 27, which, I mean, I don't expect them to have the melee defense of 68 of an Iron Breaker, but I mean, make these guys a little bit better at melee combat. Like maybe they have the ability to quote unquote drop their guns to actually fight things. I think that'd be a little bit more terrifying, because taking these things is not always useful. The way that the actual, like we said before, the way the hit detection works on flamethrower units, it's very wonky, and it always kind of leaves you wanting. You might get completely lucky and it would just completely nails home and rocks for you, or another fight it might just miss entirely and whiff. And in the competitive standpoint, from a multiplayer standpoint, it's 700 some odd points that are just kind of completely useless, whereas I'd rather use them for Quarrelers, which are almost a guaranteed hit, or Thunderers, which you can at least angle to get a better hit. Iron Drakes, they're so quick, they're so slow to actually set their guns up and fire, that they only get 1 or 2 volleys before they have to run. And if they can outrun their chasing unit, whoever's trying to pursue them, then you're lucky to get another shot at when they're behind your line. So they kind of have a really weird niche. But guys, as a whole, that talks about every single unit in the Dwarf 8th edition army book. Now, there are other portions of the Dwarf army that do exist across Forge World, across White Dwarf. I did not talk about those today. And I am saving the Demon Slayer and the Dragon Slayer for a solo video for themselves. And we've talked about now every single dwarf character as well. I don't think we've talked about Thorgrim or Bellegarde just yet. And if you guys are really interested in them, I can do separate videos for each one of them like we've been doing for a lot of the legendary lords. But hopefully this gives you guys a really good idea of how the dwarf army differs from tabletop to Total War Warhammer. And I'd say it's a very good honoring. I mean, I'm trying to think of units that are missing from the dwarf roster, and I can't think of many outside of course, the demon and the dragon slayer. I mean, those aside, pretty much everything is here. I'm taking a look over here on the actual book while I do this video. It's kind of been my guide through the whole way, of course, right? But I mean, I'm looking through everything on the back of there's always a summary section, and it shows you every single unit stat line and their point cost, or not their point cost, but what page they're on. So you can get an idea of, oh, well, this is my this, and this is what it does. So I think the dwarves have one of the most complete rosters in the game, if I'm not mistaken, for the exception of Gun, the Dragon, and the Demon Slayers. Now, you guys said you wanted more of these videos, and I'm more than happy to get more of these out here for you. I've got planned for the Kislev army list coming out quite soon. This whole week has been very dwarf themed, so we've got quite a little bit more goodies. We've got a Lehman Russ video coming out here as well on this weekend, and some streaming done tomorrow. This video is going to be coming out here on Tuesday, so you should be able to catch our Warpstone Cup on Wednesday here, starting at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a good one. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment below, all that kind of action. But have a good one, and take care.